Amazing story. Amazing story. And her name is Kristen Anderson. And I love this. This is so sweet to me. Her husband's bringing her up right now. It makes me want to cry. It's just like such a loving act the week. All right, bring her, bring her. Got you. Isn't that beautiful? Of course, he's the other guy that's allowed, but so this is Kristen Anderson, suicide. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I am absolutely honored to be here and to share my story with you. I thank you for making the time to be here, and I hope that this is a blessing and an encouragement to you. So I'm gonna start talking about my story from the beginning because that just really helps put everything into context. But I grew up, unlike most girls, but I always kind of say in many ways I had an all-American childhood because I had everything I needed. I had everything that I wanted. You know, I was very fortunate in that way. My parents were always married. I had an older brother. I had an older sister. And for most of my life, I'd say until about junior high, I thought the world was really wonderful. Life was really great. And I sort of expected life would always be that way. And it wasn't until middle school that I started to realize there were wars going on in the world. Homelessness was a real issue. Sexual abuse was a real issue. And I became burdened by all of it. So I started volunteering at a local homeless shelter. And I volunteered for about a year. And at the end of that year, I looked around and it looked like homelessness was just as much of an issue a year later as it was when I started. So I felt like I really wasn't making a difference in the world. And I started to go into high school focusing on trying to make myself, my family, and my friends happy. And that sort of seemed to work for a little while. I had a lot of friends. I was on the soccer team. My boyfriend was prom king. From the outside, and even from my perspective, it seemed like things were, getting better. But very quickly and very unexpectedly, a number of things went wrong. And among those things, I lost 4 of my friends, I lost my grandmother, I was raped, and I was being stalked by 2 young men. And all of that happened within about a year and a half's time during my junior and senior years of high school. And I was sort of the kid that everybody went to for help with their problems. So I kept how I was feeling inside. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know what to do about it. So I just didn't. And I buried it as deeply as I could, hoping that it would just go away. I would just forget all of that stuff happened. And eventually I started spiraling. I didn't know that I was like falling into a depression, but there were signs. Some of the signs were I had started smoking and drinking. I had started skipping classes, skipping school. My parents knew that my grades were dropping and that I was struggling, but they didn't know how deeply I was struggling. They didn't know how deeply my friends' deaths had affected me. They didn't know how responsible I felt. Like I almost blamed myself for my friends' deaths, things like that. And they took me to see counselors and doctors because I was physically getting sick. And everybody said it was due to stress and anxiety after the things that I had been through. But nobody ever used the word depression. And so they put me on some medication, and it never really seemed, I felt no different. So I didn't continue taking it, and I continued on with my life. And eventually, New Year's Eve of my senior year came, and I had been grounded because of skipping school. But that one night, my parents were going to let me go out. They were just trying to be like nice. This was my senior year, and it was New Year's Eve, so they were going to let me go out that night. And I remember arguing with my mom about what time I would come home. She just wanted me to come home, not too late, and I wanted to sleep at a friend's house. So we argued, and I remember agreeing to come home when she wanted me to, but walking out the door, sort of just deciding I wasn't going to come home at all. And I went to work that night. I had my friends pick me up, and I went to a party. And that night, for whatever reason, I didn't make some of the choices I had been making. I was a designated driver. I wasn't smoking. I wasn't drinking. I was just like looking out after everybody else. But I called my mom around midnight to tell her that I wasn't coming home. And I hung up before she could even respond. And I didn't pay attention to that or think about it again until the next day when I did come home about 10 o'clock in the morning. And my mom was wonderful. Like, she was always very loving, very involved, very, like, she knew who my friends were, whose house I was at. She always knew, where I was. So that was very, very hard for her. And I remember she said something like, Kristen, we didn't know if you were dead in a ditch somewhere or what happened to you. And I felt bad. I felt so, so bad. I wasn't trying to worry her. I wasn't trying to stress her. In reality, I couldn't have said this at the time, but I was just trying to do whatever made me feel a little bit better in that moment, on that day, whatever made me want to keep going. I would just do whatever made me feel a little bit better. But my parents, they didn't even know about the rape and other things that had happened. So they thought I was being rebellious. They thought I was just going through a phase. And they told me I was going to be grounded until further notice and that the things that I'd gotten were going to be taken away. And I was sort of materialistic. I found a lot of my value in the way that I looked and the clothes that I had. So that was really hard for me to have all the things that I just gotten for Christmas taken away. But to be grounded until further notice was even harder because in many ways I was living for my friends at that point in my life. That's all I was living for. So that was really, really difficult. But I remember when I got home and after talking to my parents, I went to sleep because I'd been up the whole night before. So I slept the whole day, the whole night, and then the morning when I woke up just happened to be a Sunday morning. Oops, I'm so sorry. Just happened to be a Sunday morning. And in my family, we would go to church on Sundays. And I remember I walked into church and I walked out of church feeling exactly the same way. Very, very broken, very disillusioned, lost, confused, and really empty. And when we got home, my mom laid down because she was tired from the night that she had waited up for me. And she, told me that there were some videos I could watch if I wanted of my nephews at the time opening their Christmas presents. And I decided to do that. I thought it would put a smile on my face and make me feel a little bit better, cheer me up a little bit, because they were really young and cute at the time. And so I put those videos on as my dad was at the store getting a new washer and dryer, and just thinking, this would be like a normal Sunday afternoon. But when I was watching the videos, just trying to cheer myself up a little bit, my best friend called, and her name was Kelly, and we were best friends since we were in about second grade is when we met. And Kelly and I didn't always make the best decisions together, and when she realized that I was grounded until further notice, we sort of decided I couldn't get any worse trouble. So, yeah. So I went to her house for 3 hours. We were going to make gingerbread houses. We never did make gingerbread houses, but it was our last day of Christmas break before we were supposed to go back to school. So we were just trying to make the best of the last moments before we went back to school. So I was at her house for 3 hours, and I wrote a note to my parents saying I was going for a walk. And after about 3 hours, I was like, I really should go home. I never take a walk this long. I'm sure they're getting worried. So another friend dropped me off, and they dropped me off at the end of the street because they didn't want to get in trouble for taking me. So I walked home, and I started to walk home, and it was almost like my legs wouldn't take me there. I just wasn't ready. And it wasn't so much my parents. It was that I had school the next day. Real life was about to come back, and I had homework I hadn't done. I had tests I hadn't prepared for, just all that kind of stuff. So I walked to the pizza restaurant that I had been working in. I got my paycheck, and I got a pack of cigarettes because that was something I was starting to do. And I again just tried to waste time a little bit. I was really just trying to push off all the pressure, all the stress, real life. And so I wasted time for about half an hour, and then I was like, I really, really, really need to go home. My parents are going to be, unnecessarily worried about me. I need to go home so they're not more worried than they need to be. So I started to walk home, and again, it was like my legs wouldn't take me there. I just had nothing. It's like I had nothing left in me. So I walked to the park that was kitty corner across the street from my parents' house. This was a park that I grew up playing in. And as I sat on the swings, I started to contrast these happy, joyful childhood memories that I had as a child with how I was feeling now as a teenager. So broken, disillusioned, lost, confused, empty, numb, and I felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't go back, I couldn't go forward. I felt like I was just going in circles. And really, it felt like one bad thing after another, after another, after another was happening. And like it was never going to get any better. Like no matter how much I hoped, no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I prayed, like it was all downhill from here is how I was thinking. Like it was just not going to get any better. And then I remembered in this small town that I grew up in, about an hour north of Chicago, you're not supposed to be in the park after dark. It's just a rule that they have for safety's sake. They don't want anybody in the park after dark. And the police they patrol, like they drive in and out to make sure nobody's there. And if they are, they make them go home. And I knew if they saw me, they would make me go home, but I just wasn't ready. I wanted to like gather myself a little bit more before I went home. So I looked around and I saw a train that had been parked on the edge of the park. And I had driven by over the tracks several times, and the train had been sitting there, I thought, for about 3 weeks. It hadn't moved at all. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go sit over there. They won't see me over there because it was the opposite side of the park from where the driveway was that the police drive on. So I was like, I'm going to sit on the train. It'll give me some more time to think, and I can go home when I'm ready. So I sat on the train with my legs dangling, and I remembered this thought process that I'd had about 3 months beforehand, and that was as I was grieving through my friend Brandon's death. His death was the hardest for me because he took his own life, and I just could never, I just could not make sense. I couldn't process it. I couldn't make sense of it. As I was grieving through his death 3 months earlier, I remember thinking like I could never do that. I could never take my life, especially the way that he did that. I could never do it. And as I was grieving through his death, thinking all of these things, and I thought I could never do that, especially the way that he did that, my thought process just changed a little bit. And I thought, well, if I would never do it the way that he did it, how would I do it if I ever did it, even though I would never do it? And a number of things went through my mind, things I'd heard about, things I'd read about, things I'd seen on TV. And none of them, like, clicked. But in that moment, a train went by my parents' house. And I could feel the power of the train shake our home. I could hear the whistle, like, blare through the windows, and it just sort of snapped in my mind. That's one way I could never live through it. And I didn't think about it again until 3 months later when I was sitting on the train that day. It was a completely hypothetical thought process. But when I was remembering that sitting on the train, it started to become, I started to think about it as maybe an option. I knew it wasn't the answer. Like somewhere deep inside of me, I knew very strongly that this wasn't the answer. I just didn't know what the right answer was. I didn't know what to do anymore. So I was back and forth in my mind. I don't think there's something I'm supposed to do here. And then I don't think there's nothing I'm supposed to do here. I would think things are going to get better, and then I don't think things are not going to get any better. And I was back and forth like that, just with that type of a thought process for, I think, about an hour and a half. It was definitely over an hour. And I was starting to get cold. It was the middle of winter. It was end of Christmas break. So we were, it was also late at night. So I had my winter coat on. I had gloves on. I could see my breath in the air, but my hands were getting cold because I just had these little knit gloves on. And I knew I needed to make some sort of decision or go somewhere. And right then, a train had started to come. And I hadn't made a decision. Again, I didn't really want to die. I just didn't know what to do anymore. I wanted my life to get a little bit better, and I didn't know how to help myself anymore. I felt like I tried everything I could try. And right before the train got to me, I made the impulsive decision to get off the train that I was sitting on, to walk over to the tracks next to me. And I remember as I got off the train, just trying to push down the fear and the shame that I felt, because I knew this wasn't the answer. I just didn't know what to do. So I pushed on the fear, I pushed on the shame. And right before it got to me, I made the impulsive decision to lay down on the tracks. And I remember I looked away from where, because I didn't want to see it come at me. And it was only about a split second, because I really laid down right before it got there. So it was only about a split second before the train started to go over me. And what I felt when it started to go over me is I felt my hair, my head, and the midsection of my body start to rise, like I was like getting sucked up into the train. And very quickly afterward, I felt something like push me down and hold me firmly down into the ground. And eventually the train like squealed to a stop, and I had no idea like what had happened, if why the train stopped, why I was there. Like I was just, it was kind of a big blur for me. I didn't know if I was alive or dead, if this was a nightmare, if this was reality. I was just like trying to figure it out. And as I opened my eyes and unclenched my fists, I started to look around. And as I looked behind me to my right, about 10 feet behind me on my right, I saw my legs. And I knew that they were my legs because they had these bright white tennis shoes on them that I'd just gotten for Christmas. But it felt like it couldn't be my real life. It felt like this could not be my reality. This could not have really happened. This is a nightmare. This is just a really bad dream. I'm imagining this. This cannot be really happening. So I took my arms and I used them to crawl out from underneath the train as best as I could. And as I got to the side of the tracks, I looked down at my legs to see if they were actually gone. And when I looked down at my left leg, it had been severed so high, I didn't really see anything there in the dark. So I turned my attention to my right leg, which looked like it had been severed below the knee, but I'd never seen my leg like that before. I'd never even seen an amputated leg before, to be honest. So I took my hand and I ran it below where it looked like it had been severed to see if it was actually gone. And when I did that, I unintentionally brought my hand up to my face and saw blood. And that's when I realized, like, this wasn't just a bad dream. Like, this wasn't just like a nightmare. This was really happening. I was still alive and my legs were gone. And I started crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life before. I had actually been crying for my mom the way that a small child would. And in that moment, crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life, crying for my mom like a small child would, in the worst pain I had ever been in my life. The only way I can describe it is God came near. Like, what I felt was like this tremendous peace just cover me, like just a blanket of peace and comfort. And I started to hear the song Amazing Grace play over and over and over in my mind. And people have said, like, did you listen to that in church that day? Was it a favorite song of yours? And no, at the age of 17, that was not a favorite song of mine. But it played over and over in my mind, and I found it like, comforting and peaceful, as well as just this presence that I felt. And I started to rest in that peace, like just hoping, waiting, and praying that I would die and that I would go to heaven, and that would be better somehow than this life, whatever heaven was, and not really knowing what it took to get there or anything. I just didn't think I had what it took to be in this world anymore. And so I laid there resting in that peace, hoping I would die, just waiting. And eventually I felt somebody pull my hair off my face and behind my ear. And I had not expected anybody to find me. It wasn't really long after. It says in the police report that the conductor said to the engineer, "Did you see that yellow flash?" And the engineer said to the conductor, "Yes, I think we just hit someone." So they had called 911, and that's why they had stopped the train. The yellow flash was my bright yellow jacket as I laid down on the tracks. And there were firefighters and paramedics walking the tracks, and it was a firefighter who found me first. And when he pulled my hair off my face, I looked up at him, and he sort of stumbled back because he wasn't expecting me to be alive. And I didn't know that was why at the time, but he stumbled back and he radioed to the other medical personnel of my location and my status, and they determined that they wanted to flight for life me to a hospital about an hour north of us in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But they found out they couldn't because it was so cold and foggy out that night. So they did something that, to my knowledge, has never been done since, and that was never done beforehand. And this was that they blocked all of the roads and the intersections from where I was to the closest hospital in the area that could take me. And it says in the police report that it's normally a 45-minute drive, but that they got me there in 8 minutes. And when I got there, I remember them asking me what my name was, what my parents' names were, what their phone number was, what my sister's name was, what her phone number was. And I remember just they were like prepping me for surgery. And I was able to answer all their questions, but I didn't really know, why they were there. I was kind of mad that everybody was seeing me in this state. I just wanted to disappear. More than anything, that would have been a dream come true for me at the moment. I just wanted to disappear. But they were not going to let me disappear, and they continued to prep me for surgery. And then I started to hear them talking in the corner about, like, to themselves, about how they felt like they were witnessing some sort of a miracle. And it was weird for me because I didn't feel like a miracle. I really didn't want to be a miracle. I didn't understand at all why they were saying it. And I found out it was because I had lost 8 pints of blood, and scientifically you're supposed to die after you lose 5. But I was still, conscious, alive, talking, able to answer all their questions. And eventually they did wheel me down to the operating room. And I remember just seeing like tiles and lights, tiles and lights, tiles and lights. And when they turned to try to bring me into the operating room, I looked up at this, doctor wearing, the classic like white coat or whatever. If he thought I was going to live or die, I just wanted confirmation, like one way or another, am I going to live or am I going to die? And he told me he didn't know. And he says he said that because he wanted me to go into surgery that night fighting to die, fighting to live. He just wanted me to go into surgery with like some fight in me. And I was in surgery all night. They tried to actually reattach my legs, which is something they weren't successful at doing. They did a number of blood transfusions in order to help save my life. And it wasn't until the next morning when I woke up in intensive care. It might have been like almost noon. It was like late morning. And the first time I opened my eyes, I remember seeing my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, and my brother-in-law all in the room with their arms crossed and their heads looking down at the floor. And my first thought was like, wow, something really bad must have just happened, because I didn't remember the events from the night before right away. I was just waking up for the first time, and my mom's eyes met with mine, and she ran to the side of my bed, and she said, "Oh, honey, we're so glad you're okay." And the memories just started to flood back, and I said, "Mom, they cut my clothes and they cut my coat." And she's like, "Honey, it's okay, it's okay. We can get you new ones. We're just glad you're okay." And I sort of listened to that and fell back asleep. I was on a lot of medication. And the next thing I remember was waking up because the doctor came to tell me what my injuries were. And I was not ready at all. It was snowing that day. And I remember as he told me that my left leg was severed well above the knee and my right leg was severed directly below the knee, that I might be able to walk again one day with prosthetic legs. But I just wasn't, I remember I stared out the window the whole time just watching the snowfall. I heard his words, but I didn't respond, I didn't react, I didn't say anything, because I couldn't accept this was my reality. So he left. And the next thing I remember was waking up and just feeling sort of gross and icky after everything I'd been through. I remember feeling like I just needed a shower. I'm sure I had like blood, sweat, tears, like you name it, all over me. So I asked my mom, who was in the room like tidying up things, if she could get my friend Kelly on the phone. And she did that right away, and Kelly got on the phone. And she had heard about what happened to me, even though I didn't know that. And she asked me how I was doing. But because I didn't know what she knew or not, I felt like I had to tell her something. I felt like, she's my best friend. I've known her my whole life. I have to tell her something. So I looked at my legs, and even with a sheet covering them, I could tell that they were still mostly gone. So what I said to her was, "I'm okay, but my legs are cut off." And as I said that, tears just started to stream down my face, because that's the moment that became real. That's when I realized, like, this really happened. This is my real life. This is not just a bad dream. This is not just a nightmare. This is not a figment of my imagination. This is my new reality. This is my real life. And as those tears streamed down my face, she just said, "Oh, honey, you're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. You don't need your legs. You're going to be just fine." And sometimes people have said to me, "That's so simple, that's so trite. How could she just say that? Like, how insensitive." But it was exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to know that my best friend thought I was going to be fine, with or without my legs. She thought I was going to be fine. And just a few short weeks later, I was moved from intensive care to moderate care, and I was able to have more visitors. And when I was in moderate care, so many people came and visited. And one of the things they told me over and over and over again was, Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here. Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here. I heard it so much that I almost got sick of it because I didn't know why he would keep me here without my legs. What am I supposed to do here? Like, what can I do without my legs? And the first weekend I got out of the hospital, they just let me out for the weekend to see what my life would be like in a wheelchair, like what were my challenges. And it was a really hard weekend. My parents lived in like a 2-story building, so it was like 25 stairs up to my bedroom. And they had this thick plush carpet they just put in, which just made my arms burn as I wheeled. And on Sunday, we went back to church. And a woman, I do not ever recommend saying this to somebody, but a woman who didn't know me, who'd heard about what happened to me, came up to me and told me that I would have went to hell if I died. And I agree. So I don't recommend ever saying that. But in a good way, a good thing that still came out of that, even though I don't want you to say that to anybody ever, a good thing that came out of it for me was it sent me searching, because everybody around me sort of told me the feel-good answer. The doctors, the nurses, my friends, my family, everybody I knew told me it was like a miracle that I survived. I shouldn't still be here. So it made me question, like, if I would have died, if it's a miracle that I survived, what would have happened to me? Where would I be? Where would I be right now? I wanted to know where would I be right then and there. So I started searching. I started praying about it. And not long after, this couple came to have dinner with my family. They were a little bit older couple. They were friends with my sister and her husband. I didn't really know them at all. I thought it was kind of strange that people we didn't know were coming to like encourage us, but it was fine. And after dinner, I found out that this husband of this couple was actually in seminary to be a pastor. So as I was struggling with if I would have went to heaven or hell if I had died, I asked him. I figured he might know the Bible better than anybody else that I knew. So I just asked him, did he think I would have went to heaven or hell? Like, what did he think? And he very, very like lovingly and patiently told me that every single one of us were created to be in this like personal and intimate relationship with God. Like we're made to be in this really tight, close relationship with God. But because of our mistakes, our sins, and the wrong things we've done, we're separated from him, both in our relationship with him and eternally. Our sin separates us from him. And that is why Jesus died, to pay the penalty for our sins so we can be put back into a right relationship with God. But we have to choose to accept Jesus. We have to choose to accept Jesus for our sins personally. And we have to choose to let him lead our lives personally. We have to let him be our Lord and our Savior. And when I heard that, I felt like I didn't understand it all, but I knew that what he was telling me was something more true than I'd ever heard in my life before. I knew that. I knew that much. So I asked him to show me it in the Bible. And he showed me a lot of different verses, but the verse that stood out to me the most was John 14:6. And that is where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And to me, it felt like Jesus could not have been more clear. It was like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I knew I had never made a personal choice, personal decision, like for myself, to accept Jesus into my heart, into my life, for the forgiveness of my sins, or to let him lead my life. I had not done that. I sort of felt like Jesus died for the sins of the world, so we would all just go to heaven. Like, I thought it was just, there was nothing personal about it. And when I heard this, I realized that there was a personal decision I needed to make, and I never had made a decision. I really had not ever made a choice. And I also knew, after trying to take my own life, that I had a lot of sin to be forgiven for. I was carrying a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, and I also suspected, especially after trying to take my own life, that there was something very special, very important, and meaningful that was missing from my life. And I suspected that maybe, just maybe, it was this like real relationship with God. I don't know. So I sat on the floor in my parents' dining room, and I just prayed the most simple little prayer. I just asked God to forgive me for everything I had done wrong, from day one. Just forgive me for everything, especially for trying to take my own life. I asked him to give me a new life, and I know that that was the night that I became a Christian. And the reason I know that is because as I went to sleep that night, I just felt a little bit different. I just felt like I mostly felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Like one way or another, I was going to be okay. Like the weight of the world was off my shoulders, and I was going to be okay. And sometimes I wish I could tell people like it was a complete transformation overnight, but that is not the story. It was a journey. Like it was a journey with hard roads, with hard days, and beautiful days, all mixed together. And I was in counseling for about 3 years afterward, after my attempt, and that was probably the most consistent thing in my life because I was in and out of jobs, I was in and out of not counseling, I was in and out of college, in and out of relationships. Really, everything else was inconsistent in my life. I was struggling in many ways, but I didn't know, like as a new Christian, how important it was to read my Bible. Like I just never really did that. I didn't know how important it was to be a part of a church and to have Christian friends. I didn't know how personal, like how close my relationship with God could be, like the real, deep intimacy. Like I had nobody else around me. I had no Christian, nobody really helping me. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't reading my Bible. So I was just like all over the place. But this lady who was like assigned to me as a counselor just happened to be a Christian. And she just poured into me and poured into me and poured into me. And one of the things she helped me realize was that even though I had accepted God's forgiveness, I had not forgiven myself. And in many ways, the smoking, the drinking, the partying, like all those things that I had been doing, it was really to punish myself for what I had done, to forever change my life, for the way that it had affected, my future and all my friends, all my family, everybody around me. Everybody had to like kind of cater to me in different ways at that point. And I felt shame, I felt guilt, and I just couldn't forgive myself. I didn't think I would ever forgive myself. And so when she said that to me, she gave me a challenge, and that was to memorize a verse, which I'd never done before. But she challenged me to come back a week later, memorizing Romans 8:1, that verse from Romans, which says, "Therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." And I wrote it on a note card. I put it next to my bed, on my dash, on my mirror. And this was a big step for me to even like consider doing that. But I knew I needed to do, some things differently. So I was willing to give it a try. And as I said that to myself again and again and again and again and again, it was like the words just started to sink down into my heart and into my soul. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I just said it again and again. And I realized one day, gosh, I'm no more important, no more special, I'm no greater than God is. If he could forgive me, then there's no reason for me not to forgive myself. If he can forgive me, why can't I forgive myself? Like, there's no reason. And I knew that by not doing that, I was just holding myself back from the things that he had planned for me. I knew that was something I really needed to figure out. And I went on that, journey, that hard journey of self-forgiveness. And that counselor really helped me work through that. And during that time, I had started going to a new church. And the counselor that I met had actually recommended this church. And I went by myself the first few times. And then my mom started to come with me. I started volunteering. I got really involved. Right around that same time, I have felt God tell me, I met a lady at the community college I was going to who like just shined with more peace and more joy and more love in her life than anybody I'd met before. Like she had this like shine about her, like this glow. And I remember meeting her, like not knowing anything about her except like what she had told me, going home and feeling like, God, I want to know you the way that lady knows you. Like, I want to know you the way that lady knows you. I want to have that. And what I felt him tell me was, Kristen, you have to let me be your best friend. And that made sense to me at that age. And so I just started walking towards him in that type of a relationship, letting him be my best friend. And the more that I did that, the more I started to find the peace and the joy and the love for life that I had always wanted but never had before. And it was completely transformational for me. Like I was able to get off of my medications that my doctors told me I'd have to take the rest of my life. And my mom started coming to church with me and she became a Christian. My dad started coming to church with her and he became a Christian. My dad started bringing my brother to church with him and he became a Christian. And it was a special time for us because we would have always told you we knew the Lord, that we were Christians, but we didn't really have that close relationship with him. Our lives were not centered around him. We were not living for him. And so it was a very redeeming time for our family. And God has continued to work. As soon as he started asking me to share this story publicly, as much as I wanted to keep it to myself, to my shock and amazement, so many lives were touched and changed. And I had the honor of going on the Oprah show to share the story and then writing it in a book, which took like 2 years. And the book is now in 8 languages, which is the wildest thing. And I'm now married. Yeah, amazing Christian husband, and he brought 2 beautiful children into my life, and we had 4 more together, so I'm a mom to 6. And we named all the little ones in honor of God's grace. That is when God gives us favor and we don't even deserve it. And I know that's exactly what he did for me, and he wants to do for every single one of you. Thank you so much for listening and for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.